Right, I want to talk about a particularly thorny topic. I want to talk about coming from a privileged background, particularly if you're in the arts. No one in the arts, and really kind of no one who is well known, wants to acknowledge that they come from a privileged background. Because then you can't be an underdog. And who wants to root for someone who isn't an underdog? However, I feel like this is more and more of a societal and cultural problem. Being someone who comes from privilege, I can spot when a celebrity is from a wealthy background. Whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I can spot it. Most people can't. So most people think that they're trying to, if not compete, then operate in the same world as these people who do just have so many more advantages. And there's just kind of so much that I feel should be said about this, and it is kind of a bit of a minefield. Why don't I just start off by talking about my background? So, as I mentioned in the previous video, my real name is Baldwin, not Bell. And I guess it all kind of starts with my great-grandfather, Conservative Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin. His first cousin was Rudyard Kipling. His uncle was famous painter Edward Burne-Jones. His other uncle was famous painter Edward Poynter. And my father passed away not too long ago, and my brothers and I were going through the various sort of family papers. To give you an example of this sort of family, there was one point where my brother said, "Oh, I've got a letter here, a kind of handwritten letter from an S. Sassoon." And I was like, S. Sassoon, what's the date and where's it from? And it was 1917 from a war hospital. Now, Siegfried Sassoon was one of the famous First World War poets. Turns out he was mates with my granddad, and also mates with Evelyn Waugh, this little kind of social circle. And let's put it this way, this had a defining impact on it's the reason why I've been doing music and then just like holding down a day job. So that has been absolutely instrumental in me being able to kind of pursue this vanity project, for want of a better word. I want to be totally upfront about that, and I feel like people will judge me for that, and people will feel like I am less capable as an artist and less interesting because of that. And I think they're right. And this is another reason I want to do this on a separate video, because I want the process videos to be just all the good vibes. But so much of the kind of checks that I've been cashing without realizing, I suppose, I'm starting to realize are just a major part of the problem. So why am I telling you this? Is it that kind of classic upper class, upper middle class thing of just being self-deprecating and hoping that charm's just going to breeze me through this? Well, I've mentioned that a lot of what interests me about music and a lot of the stuff I'm trying to do is essentially philosophy and trying to kind of figure out how to navigate your way through the world and how to navigate your way through life. And for me, there's this key question of, what do you do if you come from privilege? Like, do you just kind of give all your money away? That's certainly what Jesus thought, and it's a compelling argument, and I do wonder about that. I feel like this is an extremely corrupt society, and I feel very confident that to do so would just be to put the money back in the hands of, my distant relatives. But then, of course, I would say that, so who knows? What I do feel like is that you need to acknowledge, if you come from a privileged background, you don't have to hate yourself, you don't have to hate your relatives or whatever else, but you need to acknowledge that you were kind of born in the red to society. You have a social responsibility just by kind of existing. And that's tricky when you might be the only person in the room who thinks that. I also feel like I don't do anywhere near enough in terms of social responsibility. I feel like I'm figuring that out. I worry that I'm always kind of kicking it into the future. But I feel like, let's just get this out of the way from the beginning. If you're looking at, my videos and thinking, how's he able to afford all this? Is there some kind of bullshit behind that? Yeah, there is. couple more things I want to add about this. Yeah, I do believe that if you come from a wealthy background, then you do have obligations to society. But I'm someone who is a big fan of middle-class comfort. You know, I could have chosen, because my great-grandfather was a prime minister, you get a title with that. So I'm not the eldest, but like I do technically have a title, which I've never used. I could have milked that, and I could have worked in finance. And whilst I'm not necessarily bright enough to work in finance, I could have been a little fuzzy around the edges of morality and probably made a lot of money and chosen an upper class life. I chose a middle class life, and I'm a big believer in it. I'm a big fan of it. I don't think living a comfortable life is a bad thing. What I do think is a bad thing is that only a few people get to do it, and that pool is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I think if people choose not to live a comfortable life, that's cool. But that choice is not available to everybody, and that's where I feel the problem is. I'm always kind of like trying to navigate away from politics, but I do feel like, what's the expression? Like everything is political except politics, and that's personal. So my intersection with politics is like, you know, having an ancestor who's a prime minister and having a father who was in the House of Lords. And so getting a real inside track from that. But also I live in Oxford. My day job for a long time was working in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. So and my job for a lot of that was reading academics, kind of journals, new books, whatever, and then writing them up on the website as a kind of news thing. So I had to be able to read them, understand them, and then regurgitate them in a way that the academic wasn't going to send me snarky emails about. So I've sort of been on the fringes of politics for most of my life, I suppose. And I think it gives you a unique and interesting perspective. It doesn't necessarily give you an accurate perspective. It certainly doesn't give you a complete perspective. But it does mean that you're able to see, you know, certain aspects of how the sausage is made without actually being in a position where you don't want to talk about it because you'll lose your job. So, like I said, you know, the process video is supposed to be all good vibes, and I want to kind of try and avoid, I certainly just want to avoid lecturing people. But I do think if you're using art to ask interesting questions, when particularly income inequality is just spiraling through the ceiling, a certain amount of politics is kind of unavoidable.